What's up guys, welcome to a new Unity learning video. Today we're going to be creating a jumping mechanism for our little cube here. If you can see, if I quickly just play it, our little cube falls as it has gravity using rigid body 2D. So we are working in 2D, but the same principles can be applied to 3D as well. But you can see the velocity adjusts as we move left and right. And if we go to look at our script here, you can see it's really simple actually. We have a public float determining the velocity in which the cube travels at, horizontal velocity. And we have x directional, which is a value between +1 and -1 to determine the direction of our x-axis. So what the velocity workspace here does, it's a vector2 dot set, so it sets the vector2 to these respective x and y components. So our x is x directional, which determines +1 or -1 from here, and that's multiplied by our x velocity. So for jumping, we're relatively going to do the same thing. Here we can create a new private vector2, and I'll just make it a let's make it vertical workspace to handle all the vertical movement. So void check if can jump. We're gonna say if the player is not touching the ground, so that's going to be another variable I'll just create in a second. Then, actually, if the player is touching the ground, sorry. If the player is touching the ground, then the player can jump. Can jump equals true, else, oops, else cannot type today. Can jump equals, oops, can jump equals false, which is a variable we're going to create. Both of these actually here. And then is touching ground is going to be a boolean. So we'll just create another boolean here. Private bool is touching ground to determine if the player is touching the ground. And we're just going to set check if can jump under void update. So now if the player input dot get button down, if we use the jump button, and so we're getting the jump button and which we can actually just do like that. Oops. And then we'll just create a new jump function under check if can jump. And let's see, so we're saying if we get the button down, which is jump, and jump is usually assigned to our spacebar, and we can jump, so can jump is equal to true, then execute the jump. Okay? And jump is simply gonna take in, I believe we called it vertical workspace, and we're going to set the vertical workspace to the x, which is just rbvelocity.x, but the y, which controls our vertical movement, is going to be set to the jump velocity, okay, which will be something I'll put here. Let's make a public float jump velocity, and we'll just set it to, I guess we'll set it to 6. Yeah, that'll work. Let's just set this one to 12. 5 is a little too low. So now we set the vertical velocity, and then we're just going to set rigid body.velocity equal to this vertical workspace. Okay? And so now we check if can jump, and if the player is touching ground, which we actually have to check here. So inside of check for input, before we execute the jump, I'm going to set is touching ground equals a physics 2D dot overlap circle. I'll explain this logic in just a second. The overlap circle is going to be, it's going to take in a few parameters. So it's going to take in a point, which is ground check dot position, a radius, which is pretty much how big the circle is going to be, That's just circle radius. And then we will take in a layer mask, which is what is ground, or what is the ground, and I guess that is it. So what this does is touching ground, as we stated before, is a boolean, right? And the boolean is only set to true if the overlap circle, which is a physics 2D dot overlap circle, it's going to create an imaginary circle to just collide or check for the ground. And the ground we set was the what is ground. So anything within the what is ground layer mask is going to trigger this. So if the ground check dot position, so we're going to create a new empty game object. Actually, let's go here under player. I'm going to create an empty, and we're just going to call this ground check. So we're taking in the position of our ground check, which is a game object, and we're also taking in the circle radius, which is how big a circle this ground check is, and the layer mask, which I guess we'll create those in just a moment. Let's see. So this touching ground equals physics2d dot overlap circle, ground check dot position. So let's go ahead and just instantiate this variable right here. Ground check is going to be a public transform type ground check, and then we're going to have a let's do a public and the float is going to be circle radius to determine the radius of our circle, and let's set it some like 0.5, a very small value. And then what is ground is going to be a layer mask, so public layer mask what is ground. Okay, and so this is only going to be set to true if these three parameters are set, so the ground check position and the circle radius collide with what is ground. So now actually we should be able to jump a fixed number of times. Let's see if I can grab the player, and inside of movement here, the ground check is going to be our ground check. And actually, if you want to check the the radius of the circle, we can do a little function called void on draw gizmos to draw a imaginary gizmo here. It's going to be gizmos dot, I believe it's draw wire sphere. Yep. And this wire sphere is going to take in a center, which is ground check dot position. That's the center, and the radius is going to be circle radius. Okay. And there we are. So this is a little too big. So I'm just gonna minimize it. This is gonna be our ground check circle here. Alright, so now let's go ahead and just set our ground here. Ground is gonna have its own layer. We'll just set ground, oops, just one O. And then let's go to player. Then we'll go to what is ground, and then ground. And our ground object is going to have the layer ground. So this circle, if it collides with anything that has the layer ground, then can jump will be set to true. And if can jump is true, then we can jump just like that. And there you go. That is how you set up jumping in Unity. And it's actually a really, really nice system because we are not updating the rigid body velocity every single time, every frame. That slows our game down. We're just we're initializing this vector2 to our jump velocity, and that's all it's doing. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this helped you out, and have a wonderful rest of your day.